I can see the wastelanders being killed en masse and turned into compost to maximise the food output. It would be a multi-year endeavour, but once they have their own children to train in various roles, the dregs have no value. If anything, the wastelanders are just a hindrance and a potential threat. But a great leader who could have got humanity into a far better place, most certainly. A Rome of the wastelands, in a sense. But all of this was undone by a backstabbing, bleeding heart girl who ended up killing the man that actually saved her from Dementus, who killed her mother and kidnapped Furiosa in the first place. Well, his group.
Mad Max Fury Road is my favorite movie. The Mad Max video game is in my top 10 rotation, and Furiosa was okay, I guess. The ocean's dried up, now muscle car jousting is such an insane premise, but under the hood of cool rigs and big explosions are a bunch of factions and characters with a surprising amount of depth to them. That, well, sometimes it's stated outright, but more often it's shown in their behavior, manner of speaking, capabilities, or actions. Like the wives having different skills and mannerisms, indicating they were taken from different established cultures. Or the buzzard speaking Russian and Morton Joe's medals, indicating forces traveling across the ocean bed has happened before, and this is a worldwide event. These factions and characters have depth and history to them. Black and white, but under scrutiny separate into shades of gray. So when this video appeared in my feed, I was intrigued. Of course I agree Morton Joe is capable and has a long list of accomplishments. I've spoken on them myself. But is he necessary? To be fair, most of this video is explaining his accomplishments. But it overreaches. Let's begin with the dredges.
And when it comes to the wastelanders who dwell at the bottom of the citadel, who occasionally get given water, well, they lack a crop to be cultivated. So many are wretched and useless in terms of labour or skills. And in the long run, people who live off things like maggot mash and other things will lack vital nutrition, so things such as scurvy and other diseases will be very prevalent. So these crops are literally worth their weight in gold. They're a boon to the Citadel. They don't just give calories, they give nutrition so their people can be as healthy as possible. This limited space also must be factored in for the amount of people Joe can allow in, because it's not just how many people you can squeeze in, but what quality of life you can give them. As if you allow everyone who turns up at the Citadel in, we would be talking about Kowloon Ward City levels of density and poverty. And Joe and his commanders know that giving a better quality of life to the useful and loyal people is how you get the best out of them. And also how you achieve greatness. It may sound brutal, but the average wastelander is not useful. Many are deformed and in poor health. Also, an important thing to mention is the loyalty of the wasteland dregs is very flexible, as we saw when Dementus arrived at the Citadel with the promise of sharing in the wealth and abundance. Many seemed to want to embrace him and support his cause, even though they knew nothing about him and his group of nomadic bikers. They're not a loyal people, but a collection of lost souls who flock to the Citadel in search of food and water. Their only real use is that for every 9 useless people, there is 1 valuable soul, maybe a future war boy or an organic mechanic.
It wasn't made clear, so let's set a foundation to work on. The dredges surrounding the town aren't refugees. As seen in Furiosa, these people have been here for years and know the cult teachings. They are a source of recruitment. They are permanent residents. Not of the towers themselves, but of Joe's empire. They aren't outsiders, they're the lowest class of society. With that established, the 2 problems, weakness and loyalty. The dredges are too weak, diseased, mutated to be fully useful, to the point only 1 in 10 are healthy enough for service. But if they're a crop to be cultivated, wouldn't it be better farming practice to better care for your crops so you get 20, 40, even 50% return instead of 10? The dredges are worthless because they're weak. Because they're weak, we won't waste resources on them. Because they don't get resources, they are unhealthy and weak. The dredges aren't loyal, which he already admitted that giving people a better quality of life keeps people loyal and useful. The dredges are kept on the brink of death, even told that water is addictive. If there is any chance of a better way of life under those conditions, people will jump on it. Taking proper care of the dredges will build a resistance to betrayal, so they will have more to lose. The first step to solving both these problems is to provide more clean water to the dredges. The incredible thing is, this can be easily done with less waste than the current system. Joe releases water from these pipes that mists and sprays for 100 feet before splashing onto soft soil. If you put a lid on this pool to minimize evaporation and pump startup frequency, route a pipe or tube to the ground, and install a spigot, you can eliminate near all waste. You can more than double how much water each person gets without running the pumps a second longer. But there is a reason Joe doesn't do this, and for that we need to talk about the man himself.
His wives, which were slaves, that Joe wished to impregnate to give him healthy offspring, specifically a boy, as he wanted a strong, healthy, full-life heir, who could take the reins of his empire and guarantee not only his legacy, but a continuation of his empire's growth, and in the long run, the best chance we had at a great human civilization rising. Another dark side of being a wife is after 3 attempts to produce a full-life, non-mutated child, which seems difficult given the irradiated and polluted nature of the wasteland, and also maybe Joe is the issue with how many of his offspring have mild to outright Quasimodo levels of deformities. Any chance for a healthy, full-life population in the future would end. Now we'll all end up as half-lives in the future, and humanity will go from a species that averages 70 to 80 years to around 30 to 40. A hell of a drop, and this would impact any chance to build up a great civilization. Mother's milk is a luxury though, being nutritious and tasty in comparison to what most people get to drink in the wasteland. Also the fact that it's milk is able to be made into other dairy products such as cheese and yogurt, a luxury that Joe could use to reward his most loyal and great for trading. Even though it's an odd practice, you have to give it to Joe. I will say Joe closely guarded this knowledge, but that makes sense to me. You educate your loyal followers and friends, not people who might turn it against you. And Joe even puts his own life at risk to try to save his future child. This shows his commitment to his empire's future and his own legacy. Some will say it's all ego, but a lot of the time, ego translates to achievements, as people with big egos tend to want to always achieve more, which, when you're building an empire, is a fantastic thing.
Immortan Joe is a larger-than-life figure. He's built an empire and religion with himself at the head, a full consolidation of power, a dictatorship. His image is the root of his power in the minds of his followers, and he will do whatever it takes to maintain that. Big Joe is dying. He is sickly and aging, and when you're near death, your thoughts drift to what you'll leave behind. As image and power is what got Joe to where he is, that's what he cares about continuing after he's gone. A legacy. An heir. But none of his offspring are viable, and it's not the fault of the women he keeps healthy, it's him. Still, he continues to waste time and resources on this future that cannot be, instead of setting up a realistic successor. After his death, his empire and its people would suffer due to his need for a legacy. Joe's empire works by placing power in himself and granting it to those loyal to him. This system is designed to concentrate power first, not to keep his empire strong. An example of this is mother's milk, a luxury item used for rewards and bribes that necessitates overfeeding women instead of using that food to feed his starving people. Disclaimer before I say this, in the video section critiquing Furiosa, he argues the wives would dilute their genes and make future full lives extinct, which seems to imply Immortan Joe wouldn't do this. But that's just an implication, and I'm not sure if he meant it. Disclaimer over, Joe wasn't trying to preserve the gene pool either. He wanted a healthy heir, and that's it. Otherwise, he'd have male breeders as well. But women that don't give him an heir become milkers, while full lives like Max become spare parts. And I realize that what I just said there sounds fucking insane. I do not endorse this, but that's what's in the movie. The hoarding of knowledge is probably the best comparison I can make to prove my overall point. He has the knowledge needed for improving the lives of his people, but intentionally withholds it so they remain dependent on him. How to grow crops, build homes, repair mechanical systems, treat wounds, those have gone through artificial scarcity to benefit his grip on power. Consider the organic mechanic. He is a doctor, the only doctor, and that makes him invaluable. The doctor knows this and guards his secrets to keep his value high. This is how professionals operated in the Middle Ages as well. Except back then, there was a degree of rule of law that allowed professionals to take an apprentice and pass their knowledge, knowing they could one day retire and live off their savings. In that way, the world of Mad Max is worse than the Middle Ages, and Joe is directly contributing to the problem. Ego, a healthy ego, is not necessarily a negative thing. Pride in your work is commendable and leads to higher quality skills and knowledge. But pride that leads to ignoring criticism or lashing out when your image is tainted is a deadly sin. Imagine a surgeon. He has an ego, he knows his worth and skill, but he humbles himself by hearing out criticism and studying his craft to maintain that worth. Now imagine a surgeon with an ego that outweighs his worth. He doesn't take criticism because he knows he's the best. He doesn't study his craft because what he knows must be correct. His patients suffer as a result. Immortan Joe is smart. He built an empire. But he's leading it to decay with his drive for an heir that cannot be, to satisfy his ego. That doesn't answer the question I raised earlier, though. Not entirely. So let's take a step back and answer. Why doesn't Joe provide the dredges with enough water efficiently? Immortan Joe's government concentrates power at the top. If those on the bottom are given silly little things like rights, that can lead to a reduction in Joe's power. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. If some of the dredges become competent doctors, the organic mechanic loses his monopoly. He loses his worth, his power. If the dredges are given worth, they are given power. Healthy dredges improve the stock for recruitment, better soldiers, better laborers, but now they can leverage their worth through protests, or in the most extreme case, rebellion. Skilled dredges can upset the power hierarchy even more. If the empire's worth is based on the total worth of its people, and a good number of those people withhold their worth, it will force response. Either 1. Violence, forced compliance, which runs the risk of total failure. 2. Capitulation, a voluntary surrender of some power to prevent total failure. Or 3. Reversal, stripping their worth back to square one, reducing the worth of the empire and giving the dredges a taste of what could be, which builds resentment. Joe holds complete control. Surrendering any of that power to the dredges can have a knock-on effect that terrifies him. So it's important that he keeps them dependent. Enough water to survive, but not a drop more, and done in a flamboyant way that boosts his image. Operating this way weakens the power of his empire, but it gives him, personally, more power, and giving that up both hurts his ego and increases the risk of rebellion. This video I'm responding to has a book sponsor. No shade, I know a published author that only sold 5 copies, so sometimes you gotta get creative with your marketing work. I only bring this up because some of you might have noticed some similarities with my argument, so I'm going to use this as an excuse to shill the book I'm stealing my talking points from. So no joke, I only know this book from an old meme, and I only read it to improve my settlement network in Fallout 4. Why Nations Fail argues that societies fit one of 2 categories: extractive, all the power consolidated at the top, and inclusive, power is spread across the populace. The book also argues for feedback cycles. Once a population gets a taste of power, they'll leverage their worth to get more and more over time, improving the worth of the nation with them. Conversely, an extractive nation will prioritize maintaining their personal power at the detriment of the nation. Some examples include Eastern Europe banning plows for farmers, or opposing railroads as a mobile population is dangerous, or North Korea intentionally keeping their population on the brink of starvation to keep them dependent. Okay, enough shilling a book that's not paying me. What about Furiosa?
This is a prime example of people living in advantageous lands and not preparing for the inevitable storms and radiation. If they had been wiser and had competent leaders, they would have attempted to build some kind of greenhouses or biomes for growing crops and protecting their lands. And now they live off scraps like the rest of the wasteland. Unfortunately, Furiosa had this kind of lifestyle embedded in her mind, She wanted to be in symbiosis with nature, a bit of a hippie's approach to life, which is fine, but not in the wasteland where nature is literally being killed off due to pollution and radiation. It has left her with a bleeding heart, and in the harshness of the waste, this weakness will be exploited. Furiosa herself comes from a matriarchal society. She has this engraved into her soul, and would want to have the wives in charge. And we saw from the film they're a mixed bag of weird, dumb, soft and bitter. They're not built to be leaders. They would be an absolute nightmare to serve. We also saw in Fury Road that even after big losses and being blocked by the wreckage of the war rig, there's still large amounts of warriors remaining, and I doubt they would simply roll over for Furiosa. In time she would get a spike to the neck or a wheel to the face. Now at first I thought, why would each fortress not stockpile all resources that are available in abundance, such as water and gasoline, so that if the convoys are interrupted they are less vulnerable? But this need for regular trade is by design. It's so that all three of the fortresses need each other to stay fed, fueled and armed, and it's built to ensure long-term compliance. Also to deter any fortress that might try to rebel or split away from the others, as in the long run Joe knows that himself, the Bullet Farmer and the People Eater will die. So a solid foundation of unification and mutual support must be cemented into whoever inherits the task of managing these fortresses. Once Furiosa takes the Citadel, new leaders would rise in Gastown and the Bullet Farm, and I doubt they would be welcoming of her presence. Trade deals would have to be made, most likely in a worse situation for the Citadel, and with the fact that the militaries have taken heavy losses and Furiosa has a lot of resources and industry, but only young war pups remain. The main forces were all deployed in Fury Road, and many still remain. These troops would surely regroup at Gastown and the Bullet Farm, and in time the Citadel would be a prime target. There is no way on earth that everyone bends the knee to Furiosa just because Joe is dead. Many ambitious and powerful figures remain in his empire, and this is their chance to rise, and the war boys which are fanatical to Joe won't just stop worshipping him and his teachings because he's dead. That's not how cults and religions work. Many will see this as some kind of transition or sign, and will either seek revenge because their prophet has now fallen, and Furiosa would be declared a heretic. Then there's the fact that Furiosa opens the Citadel up to the dregs of the wasteland. She just lets everyone in no matter their skill set or intentions. And then throw in the politics inside the Citadel with people looking to take power and prizes, and to complicate this more, one of Joe's son, Corpus Colossus, whose body is broken but mind is sharp, is still alive and an advisor in the Citadel. I doubt he will let the death of his family go unpunished, and he will be plotting to take control. He is a very smart little guy and could make a good leader. He just needs a few strong men to back him. Outside factions will see Furiosa's weaknesses and exploit them. Lacking any major military forces now, outside factions such as the Buzzards will become increasingly brave with their raids and ambushes. The quality of the people in the Citadel would drop rapidly, with many being useless, and even the ones willing to learn a skill or be a soldier being riddled with diseases and having broken minds. You're going to see a degradation in everything from maintenance to drivers. It will be a lower quality society, and over time it will spiral into a hodgepodge of uselessness.
I'm not a big fan of the Green Place either, but this is unfair. In the second film, we don't see a large population as only 2 warriors go after the intruders. The storms have also gotten a lot worse, from a visibility hazard a motorcycle can traverse to the lifting cars and cyclones. So the natural rock barriers that protected the land probably weren't enough over time. The water itself was poisoned, which means it wasn't as deep and protected as the Citadel's supply. Greenhouses won't solve that. While Furiosa was born in a hippie matriarchy, she left when she was very young and spent most of her life as a mechanic and warrior. She understands the structure and capabilities of the men in the Citadel. It is very unlikely she'd give control to the wives out of misguided girl power, especially since in Fury Road she was hesitant to trust them to even watch for hostiles, instead relegating them to simple tasks like counting ammo. Her arc in the film mirrors Max's, that is opening up and learning to trust. It's his plan of returning to the Citadel that she agrees to. It's his life that she saves when he falls off the war rig, and it's him that saves her life on the quiet ride back. Furiosa doesn't show any signs of imminent girl boss shenanigans. When the rocks came down, the war boys were already depleted, tired, and low on supplies. The rocks cause collisions that further worsen things, and most importantly, they are trapped in bikers' territory. The bikers have gone through their own losses, but are in more need of supplies now than ever, have knowledge of local terrain, have their prey boxed in, have access to explosives, and probably have more guns. The war boys aren't leaving that canyon. The fortresses are interdependent, but also they're going to attack Furiosa is a self-defeating argument, but let's kick it while it's down. The resources of the fortresses aren't equal. You can survive without fuel. The castle-like defenses make the citadel less dependent on gunpowder, but everybody needs water. Joe intentionally gave himself an advantage over his vassals, and now Furiosa has that advantage. Add to that, Furiosa made several visits to the other fortresses as an imperator, and would become at least familiar with the big players there. This is the same imperator that made a deal with the bikers. She's experienced with diplomacy, is familiar with the players, and holds the advantage in trade goods. She'll be fine. The surviving son is intelligent, but he's physically disabled. That might not sound like a big deal, but this is actually very important. Immortan Joe's cult of personality is based on power, his immortality. Joe's death wasn't just the death of a religious figure, it was proof that his religion was a lie. The culture he enforced respects strength and power. He died, but more than that, he was defeated in combat by Furiosa. That's why the war pups accepted her and started the elevator. Back to the crippled son, he doesn't have the respect that Furiosa has because he lacks the physical strength. His role under his father was that of an advisor, but the best he can hope for now is to maintain that position, which would greatly benefit Furiosa. Outside threats will prod at the Citadel. The natural defenses of reopen trade with the bullet farm will keep them back, but expansion like Joe wanted will be delayed until forces can be built back up. Likely through trade with the bikers, since their captured vehicles won't benefit them in a canyon. Society will not degrade under Furiosa, it will thrive. Well, comparatively at least, it is still the apocalypse after all. With Joe's oppressive hand lifted, the people will be more free to reach their higher potential worth. But to address it specifically, we are not shown Furiosa letting all the dredges into the spire. We are shown a single elevator crowd let up while a good number rush towards the running water. It is very likely those on the elevator were flanked by guards, fed, given water, and returned to their hovels before nightfall. To assume otherwise is to just make a guess without considering the odds. It's more likely that the elevator rides will become more frequent, but as the video said, there's not enough space for everyone. Improving conditions on the ground not only gives you better workers, it also lessens the desire to move into the spire. That would probably still be the goal for most people, sure, but they'll be less desperate and dangerous. Am I convinced Furiosa's rule will lead to a long-term healthy society? No, not really, but I am sure that Big Joe's wasteful dictatorship was reaching stagnation and was destined to be nothing but scavengers and ruins in the sand. Furiosa brings the possibility of meaningful change, and I think odds are good that she'll succeed. Just to make sure I didn't miss anything, not to put anybody on blast, let's go through some comments.
Joe's only weakness was he didn't think of simple training a young aspirant from youth instead of just trying for his own kid since that wasn't working.
That was far from his only mistake, though it is what set his downfall in motion. Moreover, it's an indication of his motives and larger weakness.
A Chinese proverb I heard once, a good man is not a good empire.
A good man can do terrible things if it means his people benefit, while a weaker man isn't willing to do what is necessary. But Joe only wanted what was best for him and was using his people to get it. Also, I find this quote incredibly entertaining considering how stable ancient China was.
Plenty of water, plenty of food, a trade network capable of maintaining a large army, and a competent vassal who doesn't get shot for complaining? Well, that's competent leadership.
Zhou is very competent. He built this empire, built the infrastructure needed to get near unending water in a desert world. But his greed and ego will lead to total collapse. It is not a question of intelligence.
The thing is, the efficiency of the citadel can be expanded upon. Create a curtain wall around the citadel's 3 rocks. This forms Citadel Area A on the ground side. Any scrap can be welded into 4 things. An aqueduct
No
that
disrespect,
enclosed
but this one's
me-
too long. I'll leave it on screen as it's an interesting read. The man is spitballing ideas on how things can be improved and grown to make a stronger empire. Credit to him, I like these ideas, but Zhou wouldn't even give the dredges proper hydration to make better workers. That's how adverse he was to giving them worth. Furiosa, on the other hand, could put this into practice, which leads me to my actual conclusion, the meta. I'm gonna armchair psychology real quick because I think I know what happened here. Layer 1, general audiences see Immortan Joe as a bad guy. Layer 2, some of us realize Immortan Joe is competent and accomplished. I think some people got to Layer 2, noticed Joe was smart, and figured everything he did had a purpose and was the right thing to do considering his prior accomplishments. If Furiosa is opposing our big boy Joe, then she must be in the wrong and is screwing everything up. 2 factors amplify this response. General audiences not realizing how smart Joe is, creating an us versus them mentality, and the popularity of the cold pragmatism trope. I, for one, love that trope, and it's very popular in post-apocalypses and dystopias. Essentially, the characters aren't evil, but do evil things because it's a pragmatic solution to a horrible problem. Think SCP Foundation, or aspects of the Warhammer 40k world. I believe this video I'm responding to was made because Joe was misidentified as a cold protagonist instead of the ego-driven dictator he really is. Besides all that, it's actually a decent lore video for learning how the Empire functions.